Well, House Republicans have eyed tomorrow for the vote on legislation to provide $14.3 billion in military aid and support to Israel in its fight against Hamas. Now, this legislation would be offset by cuts to the billions that the Biden administration directed to the IRS last year in its woefully misnamed Inflation Reduction Act. President Biden has already declared he will veto this urgently needed package of aid for Israel, possibly delaying it due to partisan concerns. Joining me now to discuss this and more, Congressman Mike Waltz. He serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. He represents the 6th Congressional District of Florida, and he's helping shepherd this piece of legislation through. Congressman Waltz, welcome back to the program.
Hey, good to be with you, Tony. Thank you.
I was just before coming into the studio, I was talking with the majority leader, and he says there's broad support across the conference and possibly even Democratic support for this bill once it hits the floor. What's your take?
Yeah, I think you'll have some bipartisan support, Tony. I'm sure you've heard grumbling from the Democrats with the talking point that we're allowing more loopholes for the rich by cutting IRS agents. But at the end of the day, I think House Republicans have been consistent that we have to stop borrowing money, even for emergencies, even for our greatest ally. We have to find what we call pay-fors to go forward when we're talking tens of billions of dollars. I, for one, think a few less IRS agents is perfectly acceptable, especially when we're not talking about helping Israel. We're talking about the survival of Israel.
Right. And look, I mean, I think those that want to vote against this are going to vote for terrorists that are fighting against Israel, and it's going to be a vote for those who want to terrorize the American people through the IRS. So, I mean, I guess they can have
yeah, fair. Yeah, that's a great point. But, I think you're going to have others that, frankly, are sympathetic to terrorism, sympathetic to Hamas, and they're going to use the IRS excuse for their vote against it. And that's a shame, but we know who they are. We'll call them out. And at the end of the day, this is about standing strong for good versus evil. And there's very little in between.
There's another principle here that you've articulated, and I've heard this. Well, this is setting a precedent. We don't want to set this type of a precedent for emergency spending. Well, we're $33 trillion in debt. At some point in time, we have to say we can't have everything. We can't do everything. So I think now is a good time to set a precedent.
No, I think you're right. And there's another precedent that I would point to for those critics. And that was 20 years of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that was called GWAT funding, or Global War on Terrorism funding. And then they changed it to contingency funding. But either way, it was completely off the books, non-budgeted, borrowed money to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. And we are certainly slipping into that category when it comes to Ukraine. We have that funding that the president has sent to us. And he's basically saying, give me that blank check, give me that $60 billion, when he is the one, Biden is the one that has slow rolled and dithered us into a stalemate in Ukraine, has no clear end state, no strategy to achieve it. Look, I firmly believe we need to stop Putin, but we also need a strategy for the long term. And you can't just keep saying, give me more, and trust me. Especially when it's this administration, I don't trust them as far as I could throw them. And when their energy policy has Russia and Putin's coffers full because of the high price of oil, because of their obsession with climate, we're literally spending against ourselves. So we're going to ask a lot of tough questions when it comes to Ukraine. But I do think we'll get Israel out today and tomorrow.
Congressman Waltz, retired Army colonel, you and I have actually talked about this privately about Ukraine. And as you just articulated, it's not an issue of whether or not we should support Ukraine against Putin. It's what are we doing with this money? There's no accountability. There's no plan. And I think after spending $75 billion and a request now for another $60+ billion, Isn't it time they tell us what they're going to do with it?
What does success look like in line with our interests? Is it the pre-invasion line? Is it all of the Donbass? Is it all of Crimea? What is it? How long is it going to take? What's it going to cost? What are those funds buying? Biden is still withholding things. The Ukrainians, if they had had him in the very beginning, this thing probably would have been over by now. So, yeah, we're going to ask those tough questions. And then on top of that, Europe needs to step up. And I will continue to point out to all of my colleagues and the administration, Germany just formally backed away from its 2% of GDP defense commitment in its parliament last month. And I am sick and tired of the U.S. taxpayer subsidizing European social programs. They need to step up and pay for their own defense.
This brings up another question that I didn't think we were going to discuss. But when we're talking about Israel, we have Turkey saying that they may engage in Gaza. I mean, that's a NATO ally. I mean, we've had issues with Turkey. Is it time we reevaluate that alliance?
Well, yeah, I think it is under constant evaluation, Tony. I don't want to lose Turkey. I mean, they're the largest land army in NATO. This is an Erdogan problem, not necessarily a Turkey problem. And I think there are things to do that we can do to leverage him in the right direction. But I think even taking a step back further, we need to be taking a hard look at all of the enablers of Hamas. They need to be the ones taking on Palestinian refugees. We need to hold them at risk for their support to Hamas. And then finally, when there's a lot of people asking about what happens after Hamas is destroyed, who's going to do the rebuilding, we need to be looking at Turkey, at Qatar, and others. And oh, by the way, we have to shut off the money flowing into Iran. Otherwise, we'll just be mowing the grass. And those terrorists will grow back again as long as Iran is flush with cash. So my whole point with this supplemental is there's a lot of policy problems, whether it's Iran or border or Ukraine. And I, for one, am not for just throwing the taxpayer dollars at bad policy from this administration.
Final question for you, Congressman Mike Waltz. Does the House hold the line on the separation of the funding bills? So if the Senate rejects it, sends it back, does the House hold the line in funding Israel and Ukraine separately?
Oh, absolutely. Because, again, the border that's not a money problem. That's a policy problem. We know that from the last administration's policies. I just outlined the problems with the lack of strategy in Ukraine. And in Gaza, it's an Iran policy problem. They are absolutely flush with cash and foreign currency reserves. That's what has to shift. And if we have to use this time and this moment to drive the administration to better policy, that's absolutely what we should do.
All right. Congressman Mike Waltz, always great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
All right. Thank you, Tony.